It was the fall season in the small town of Dry Creek, where fields stretched for miles and the setting sun bathed the land in hues of orange and gold. Most farmers welcomed the crisp air and the anticipation of the harvest, but for the locals, there was one farm they avoided, especially as October drew near: the old Carver Farm. It had been abandoned for years, left to rot, but rumors still lingered. People whispered about strange sounds and unexplained disappearances. And there were stories about the animals. It all began decades ago when the Carvers, a once thriving farming family, mysteriously vanished overnight. Their land, once teeming with life, became a graveyard of withering crops and empty stables. But the animals? They were still there, or so it was said. No one could explain it, but the cows, horses, chickens, and pigs, once just livestock, had changed. Something evil had taken root. Sarah, a young woman new to the town, had always been skeptical of local legends. Having grown up on a farm herself, she was familiar with the tall tales rural communities liked to tell. When she first heard about the Carver Farm, she dismissed it as nonsense. But when her friends, eager to prove their bravery, dared her to spend a night there, she accepted without hesitation. After all, what could be so terrifying about an abandoned farm? Armed with nothing but a flashlight, some snacks, and a blanket, Sarah made her way to the Carver Farm as twilight descended. The gates creaked as she pushed them open, revealing the overgrown path leading to the decrepit farmhouse. Weeds clawed at her ankles, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. The farmhouse loomed ahead, its windows dark and hollow like the eyes of a forgotten ghost. But it wasn't the house that unnerved her, it was the silence. No crickets, no wind, just an oppressive quiet that weighed down on her chest. The barn stood to the left of the farmhouse, half collapsed but still imposing in the fading light. As Sarah approached, she noticed something peculiar: the barn doors were slightly ajar. She felt an unnatural chill but forced herself to push them open. Inside, the stale air smelled of old hay and something far more rotten. But there was something else: she could hear breathing. Shining her flashlight toward the stalls, Sarah gasped. The animals were still there. But they weren't right. A cow's eyes, usually warm and docile, glowed with a sinister red hue. It stared at her, unmoving, its breath ragged and shallow. In the next stall, a horse stood unnaturally still, its head hanging low, but its eyes, those eyes, tracked her every movement. And then she heard it, a deep, guttural growl, not from any animal she recognized. Her flashlight flickered, and in that brief moment of darkness, she heard the shuffle of hooves and claws. When the light returned, the animals had shifted. They were closer now, and their faces twisted into grotesque, almost human-like expressions. Panic surged through her, and she turned to leave, but the barn door slammed shut, trapping her inside. Whispers filled the air, though she saw no one. The animals, all of them, began to move toward her, slow and deliberate. Their bodies contorted unnaturally, bones cracking and reshaping as if something far more sinister had taken hold of them. The pig's snout elongated, revealing sharp teeth, the chicken's feathers bristled like spikes as its beady eyes gleamed with malice. Sarah backed into a corner, her breath quickening. She clutched her flashlight like a lifeline, the beam shaking as it passed over the animals, each more horrifying than the last. But then she noticed something else: there were footprints in the dust. Human footprints, leading toward the back of the barn. Desperate for escape, she followed them, hoping they led to a hidden door or a way out. But the footprints led her to something far worse. At the end of the barn, beneath a pile of rotting hay, was an old trapdoor. She hesitated for only a moment before pulling it open, the rancid smell hitting her like a wave. With no other choice, she climbed down into the dark abyss. The basement was worse than the barn. The walls were lined with rusted cages, some of them still containing bones, human bones. Scattered across the floor were broken tools, chains, and what looked like ancient occult symbols scrawled in blood. Her heart pounded in her chest as the realization hit her: this was no ordinary farm. The Carvers had been involved in something dark, something forbidden. They had been sacrificing people to whatever evil had taken hold of their land. And the animals? They had become vessels for that darkness, twisted by years of malevolent energy. Suddenly, a loud creak echoed from above. The animals were in the basement with her now, their hooves and claws scraping against the stone floor. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they became a chorus of voices, speaking in a language she couldn't understand. Sarah's legs trembled, but she forced herself to run, darting between cages and shelves, searching for an exit. As she rounded a corner, she saw it, an old, rusted ladder leading up to a small opening. Without thinking, she climbed, her hands slipping on the cold metal, but she didn't stop. Behind her, the sounds of the animals grew closer, their growls and snarls filling the space. She could feel their hot breath on her neck as she pulled herself up and out into the night. She stumbled into the field, gasping for air, her body trembling. Behind her, the barn stood silent and still, as if nothing had happened. But she knew better. She could feel their eyes watching her from the shadows, waiting. She never spoke of that night again, and she never returned to the Carver Farm. But the locals knew. They always knew. And every year, as the harvest moon rose over Dry Creek, the whispers would begin again. The animals were still there. And they were waiting for their next victim.